Summer is supposed to be an opportunity to slow down, but when you look at your kids, you can't help but notice that your kids are growing up fast. Help them build independence as they grow with Greenlight. Greenlight is a debit card and money app for families, where parents can keep an eye on kids' money habits while kids learn how to save, invest, and spend wisely. It's the easy, convenient way to raise financially smart kids. Get your first month free when you sign up at greenlight.com/Spotify.
40 gigabytes, see details.
Hello, hello. Welcome back to Peak Northwest, an outdoors and travel podcast by the Oregonian and Oregon Live, dedicated to the adventure and exploration of our beautiful Pacific Northwest. I'm Jamie Hale.
And I'm Vicki Connor. Together, we take you to some of the most beautiful and interesting destinations in our region, discussing where to go, what to do, and places to see. And today, we're headed to some places that we bet you've never been to before.
Yeah, Vicki, every year I get visitor data from Oregon State Parks, and every year I put together what has become like a pretty popular feature, the least visited state parks in Oregon. But after a couple years of this, I realized that I had never been to the vast majority of these places, and I hardly knew even where they were. So this year, while I was out on the road, I decided to change that.
Curious, Jimmy, how many do they include in least visited places? What's the cutoff?
That's up to me, actually.
Okay.
They just give me the numbers. I make it a list of 20 every year because that seems reasonable. You got to put the cutoff somewhere. But within that 20, there's some that kind of come and go. Like sometimes it's like Saddle Mountain was in there for a minute when they had closed for half the year, right? And so it had technically been one of the least visited. But there's several in there, these really small remote parks where there's not a lot of anything. It's maybe a picnic area, maybe a hiking trail, or they're just so far out there that people don't bother going to them. And I would see the same parks every year come up on this list. And some of them I had been to before, Cottonwood Canyon, we've talked about before. It's one of Oregon's newer state parks, maybe not at this point, but it's relatively new. It's a little remote. It's harder to get to. It is also beautiful. Or Golden and Silver Falls, which is in the southern Oregon coast. Gorgeous, gorgeous spot, but it's such a drive to get there. So there were some like this, but I was really interested in these ones that were at the top of the list. So I did this list last year. There's this group that's really honestly, it's numbers 1 to, one, basically the top 5, give or take, that were all kind of clustered in this one little area in Northeast Oregon. So while I was out there in Joseph, on the way back, I decided instead of just taking Interstate 84, let me take an extra hour and a half, jump off the freeway, and take this rural route to go see some of these little visited state parks, just for fun. Just to have some also to have some pictures in our archives. I write about these every year. I was I got to get some pictures of these places.
So how many were there in this area that you were trying to knock out?
There's one that's not quite in the same area as the other, is a place called Catherine Creek that I got to on my way to Joseph. But on this little this one road, so if you're basically if you're on I-84 and you are just west of LeGrand, which for folks who don't know that area is east of Pendleton, there's this side highway, Oregon 244, that you can take that goes through the Blue Mountains and connects with US 395. So in that kind of area of 244 to 395, there are 4 little parks that you can stop off at on the side of the road.
And so how did you choose which one to go to first? Was it just in the order of what you were hitting?
Yeah, it was exactly right. So I started off, I took I-84, past LeGrand, jumped off the freeway, and there's one that's right there. So the first one is this place called Hillgard Junction. And the caveat here is that this is not in the bottom 20 state parks this past year. This one's a little bit higher up there. It's still low on the list, but it's because it's right off the interstate, it gets a little more traffic. This is a place, it has a campground, it has a day use area, right there along the Grand Ronde River. It's got picnic tables, really easily accessible places to go fishing or to go wading. It's, small and there's not a ton there, but it was a pretty charming spot. So, I pulled off and just, took some pictures of essentially the picnic area and the river. There's a whole section of day use area that I think is supposed to be open, but wasn't for some reason. But I think people mostly go here if they want a place to camp that's on the side of the highway, um, that's close to like LeGrand, Pendleton. So if you're on a long road trip, especially, and you just need to pull off in your RV and sleep the night somewhere at a campsite, this is a great spot to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Were there other people around?
There were a few people camped. I did not see a single other person. Like I saw some RVs and some tents, and that was it. It was early in the morning on a weekday, to be fair, but I didn't see anyone out there.
And so the way that state parks are collecting their numbers as far as like usage, how are they counting it?
It's a little tricky. So they're doing this for when it comes to day use numbers, which is what we're talking about here. They have traffic counters at the parks. So they will track when a vehicle comes into the park. And when a car does that, they multiply that vehicle visit, by a number they've previously determined to be the like average number of people per car. So the specific number is not as important as like how it ranks with everything else, because the formula is the same for all the parks. So like, I mean, we can talk about like the number of people that visit these places, and but it's just not quite as important. But just know that it's like, if we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people visiting Silver Falls, these parks are more like 20,000 people per year, or like 15,000 people. So that's the scale we're kind of working with.
Gotcha. All right. Well, where did you head to after this?
So I branched off then on to Oregon 244, and I just kept driving. This is like such a rural, quiet road. There's like nothing there. I passed some like, U.S. Forest Service land, clearly some timber going on up there. But otherwise not, it was very quiet. But I then got to a place called Red Bridge State Wayside, which is one, again, I've seen on this list for forever. So last year, for example, Red Bridge was the 4th least visited state park. So we talk about those numbers. It was like just a little less than 18,000 people last year. Red Bridge, I had sort of seen pictures of before, and it looked like, again, just a little campground. Not a lot there. So it has this 20 primitive campsites, 10 of which are like walk-in only. It has a little picnic area, but then it also has this little trail network that kind of runs through this very small park. It's tiny, but this trail network runs along, again, we're talking about the Grand Ronde River, to a couple of spots that were like really pretty, really beautiful little riverside areas. There were some like, great mountains, like not mountains, but some hills across the river that were like kind of like this sort of auburn color in the light, and these really pretty trickling shallows that you could walk into or fish. Maybe it was just also the morning light. It was really beautiful in there. I saw some people who were, they looked to be setting up for a wedding. They were doing some food setup, and they had this sort of big, archway they were putting up at one of the picnic areas. So I did see people, they were using it. I saw a few people that were camped out there. It seemed like that park gets some local use, but clearly not enough to move it up this list of like, popular state parks. So it's still very remote. And maybe if you're not getting married there, there's not a lot of reason for you to stop by. But I will say, if you happen to be in the area, this is one that does make a nice little place to stretch your legs. Whereas like Hillgard Junction wouldn't necessarily recommend unless you're trying to stay the night. Red Bridge Wayside, do give this one a recommendation.
Amazing. I know you mentioned that auburn type of light. Is Red Bridge, like the name, alluding to anything?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to. I don't know. I wish I had a quick answer to it, but I really don't. I'd have to find my book of Oregon geographical names.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if you're getting married anytime soon and you're really finding it hard to find a venue, a least visited state park could be for you.
On that note, state parks are a great place to get married. I got married at a state park.
Yeah.
Their picnic shelters are like surprisingly easy to book at a lot of places.
Yeah.
So honestly, it's a great place. If you're getting married or have a family reunion or you just want to like have a party, picnic shelters are the way to go. You can book them pretty easily. They're very inexpensive. And the facilities are usually top notch. So go for it.
Spoken like our true travel and outdoors reporter right here. All right. What's next?
So continuing down 244, I will say on this drive after Red Ridge Wayside, I had a really interesting experience where I ran into, not like literally, but I came upon an enormous flock of sheep on the highway. I had seen this truck driving the other way and it had this like orange flag. It was waving out its window as it drove. And I was like, oh, that's weird. But I guess I'll keep an eye out for something. And then it kind of rounded the bend and it was like literally like, I don't know, like 1,000 sheep. So many sheep just like taking over the entire road. And so I had to stop and like just let the sheep go around my car. And eventually saw like a couple of like, they're like look like a little family of people that were like walking behind and like shepherding a sheep. This little kid on a bike kept going back and forth to like stop traffic. It was like the most charming experience. Rolled down my window and just listened to all the sheep do their little bleating and stuff. It was super weird and cool. And I loved it.
I feel like I would have had to stop my car, get out, and like it's meant to be like petting zoo hour, right? Oh wow! Truly, I saw that video of it happening that you provided, and it looked like it was straight out of a movie.
Yeah, it was wild. So that was near the town of Ukiah, which is sort of at the western end of this Oregon 244. So okay. I went through the sheep. I went through Ukiah, very, very small town, and that took me to US 395. So at that intersection, I turned left and went south. And just for a few miles, I got to the Ukiah Dale Forest State Scenic Corridor. Okay. That was the next park. This is last year anyway, was the #1 least visited state park site in Oregon. Just over 14,000 people in a year. There's not a lot going on at the Ukiah Dale Forest State Scenic Corridor. Again, it has a primitive campsite. This is along Camas Creek. So we've left the Grand Ronde River behind. We're now on Camas Creek. It's a seasonal campground. It's a good fishing spot, according to the State Parks Department. There's not a lot of like day use area. I pulled off just before the campground and kind of just wandered up and down, like, I don't know, maybe it was like, 50 yards of creek front area. It was certainly pretty. I got some pictures of like the creek and the grasses growing alongside of it, but that was about it. So I would say this is not a stop. If you're looking for a remote place to camp where you're not going to be around a lot of other people, for whatever reason, that's what you're looking for. This could be a spot for you. But for those taking a road trip, unless you're trying to be a completionist here like me, I would not recommend Ukiah Dale. There's not a lot there for you. Yeah.
I feel like some people might be wondering, like, why is this a state park even at all? And what would you say to that, Jamie?
I mean, the Parks Department has created parks for many reasons. Sometimes they're donated a piece of land that it becomes a park. It could be that they're looking to increase, rural campsites. It could be this is a good fishing spot where people were camping anyway. It could be any number of reasons. But parks aren't just created to accommodate a large number of people at a particularly scenic location. Sometimes that's true, but that's only one of the reasons that the state parks department exists. So for folks who love their quiet fishing spot with a little primitive campground in the middle of rural Oregon, this is great and good for them. And I'm really happy that this exists for them. And if that's your thing, go out there, enjoy it. You can, get some good trout, steelhead, and salmon out there. So I'm told. So have at it.
Yeah. All right. Do we have one more?
Well, we've got one more on this. Then we've got to circle back. We got to do a circle back because I forgot one. So the last one on this road trip here, I just went back up north on 395, past the intersection with 244. And just a few miles north of that, there's a place called Battle Mountain Forest State Scenic Corridor. So this is kind of leaving the river behind. It's going up into the mountains a little bit as you're going back north towards the interstate. And this is a little picnic area off the highway. Again, this is one of these ones I see on the list all the time. It was number 2 on last year's list of least visited parks. So very, very few visitors, but I thought it was a pretty cool little picnic area.
Yeah.
So the main draw here is there's this large granite fireplace in the middle of the picnic area that was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 30s, and that visitors are apparently allowed to use. I don't know if you're going to cook on that fireplace or if you're just going to do it for warmth or for the scenic enjoyment of it, but it's very beautiful and interesting. And it's sort of on this hill on Battle Mountain with some views around the area. So it was pretty. It was there's a lot of space. I would say if you're for some reason traveling in this area and you want a place to pull off and have a bite to eat or stretch your legs, use the bathroom. There's a bathroom there. Great spot. I quite liked it. So, would recommend Battle Mountain for folks. Again, if you're in this area,
make some scenic s'mores on the fireplace.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, you mentioned we're circling back for one more. Tell us about it.
Well, I mentioned that Catherine Creek is this park that's kind of off the beaten path. That is like farther away from this little cluster. Catherine Creek is not to be confused with Catherine Creek that is in the Washington side of the gorge. That's, I think, the Catherine Creek most people know. This is just a park that's coincidentally by the same name. So this is on the other side of LeGrand. So if you're taking I-84 and you go east of LeGrand, you can hop off on Oregon 203 through the town of Union. This is another very small town out there. And not too far from Union, off the side of that highway, is Catherine Creek State Park. This is a bit different from the other ones because there's a bit more to it, which is great. Again, this is super low visitation. It was number 3 on last year's list. So we're talking, again, very few people go there. But it has a little campground, like a lot of them do. And also has this really nice little trail system. So I pulled off the side of the road expecting just like snap a picture, be on my way. But I saw the sign for the trails and I was like, oh, I can do like a few miles of hiking here. So I spent like a good maybe hour or so hiking around this park. There's this one trail that goes up into the hills above the park, and it does a little loop up there. It's pretty short. I want to say it was just a couple miles, if that. But the whole forest was blooming with these shrubs that were they had these clusters of white flowers on them. I learned is Pacific 9-bark is the plant. And there were all these other wildflowers that were out there as well. Some red columbine flowers, other ones, I don't know what they're called. So it was just like all these wildflowers throughout this forest. And then it opened up to a couple of viewpoints looking into the Blue Mountains, which are sort of like, deserty, sort of high desert-ish mountains. Very pretty, very cool. And then you can follow the trail back down to the creek, Catherine Creek, where it runs sort of from the campground to the picnic area. And there's a bridge, these really charming footbridges that look the same at each spot. It's sort of like these little arched bridges that go over Catherine Creek to this big picnic area or to the campground. So I found it like really charming and cute and sweet. And again, this is a place where like most people go to camp somewhere quiet and remote. I like this is a spot that saw an uptick during the pandemic, for example. All these places we saw, like a lot of these remote campgrounds in 2020, and people were like, I want to go camping, but I don't want to be near anybody. These places were where they went.
Yeah.
So they've since come down since then in numbers. But I think they still have this reputation as like a great spot to get away from it all, get away from other people, just have a quiet spot by the creek where you can sit and relax, do whatever you want to do. But I really liked the vibe of this place. I loved hiking around there. This is a spot where, like, again, I wouldn't make a special trip to go there, but if you happen to be around that area and you're looking for, something to do, definitely get out of your car, walk around Catherine Creek. It's a good place to do that.
Wow. Nice. So with all of these, it sounds like Catherine Creek is pretty high up there in your favorites of these that you took this detour for. What is kind of like your ranking of these?
Catherine Creek at the top.
Yeah.
Then I'd say Red Bridge, and then Battle Mountain, and then the other two.
Okay.
Yeah. I think those are the three that I actively enjoyed being there. No knock on Ukiah Dale and Hillgard Junction. It just, there wasn't a lot there.
Wasn't for you.
Wasn't for me. But I again, these are like places where, like, I'm not going to say go plan your trip around them. I thought it was fun to do a road trip that was like a side trip, I should say, that was specifically centered around a cluster of these because it was interesting to me. And I'm a freak like that. I got to go to all the places, So it was really worth it to me to go on this little side quest, but I'm hard pressed to recommend anyone do what I did.
Yeah.
But again, if you are at all interested in these little places, I think it's fun to go see some spots that, like, you're not going to see otherwise. And to get a look at some different areas. I mean, I would have never seen that big flock of sheep had I not done this. And that's like a cool, like, lifelong memory. Yeah. So I think you find these surprises when you go out of your way and you go into these little visited places. And for folks who get mad about, like, hyping up places that are going to become crowded, none of these are going to become crowded. That's just not going to happen. So feel free to go, enjoy it, experience it. I think it's very fun.
Are there any other least visited parks that you are itching to go to?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, after I did this, I went back through that list of the top 20 list of last year, and I was like, where else have I not been that, like, I could get to? And so a lot of these, like, there's other clusters of these places. There's one, in Southern Oregon around Lakeview. There's a bunch of these. There's some kind of in Southeast Oregon. But there's one, a Jackson F. Kimball State Recreation Site that looks so cool. It's like a little, like a place where you can do fishing, canoeing, kayaking. The water is crystal clear. Ooh. And it seems like it has this forest of quaking aspen that are beautiful in the fall. It's a spot that people don't go to because I think it's right near Crater Lake. And I've experienced this where I've driven past it and gone like, I don't want to spend an extra hour. I'm like, like, I'm so tired of driving. But I think I'd love to go back there and go kayaking. Like, kayaking there in the fall is kind of like my ideal trip. Like, I want to get a kayak, be out there in those waters with the aspen changing colors and that water, like, turquoise and clear and beautiful, this is what I'm looking at Jackson F. Kimball. So I think that's the one that's next on my list.
That sounds like an incredible time, actually. And then just keep on going to Crater Lake if it's not completely snowed over yet.
Exactly. It's a good fall addition to your Crater Lake trip.
Yeah.
I think you just have to think about these things ahead of time. We talked about Crater Lake on last week's episode, and how there's so many things to do there. But like thinking in advance of adding these little side trips, for me anyway, it makes it so much easier. It's harder for me to like see a sign for this tiny park that I don't know about and stop.
Yeah.
That's just like how I'm wired. But if I'm like, I have it in my agenda, then I get to go see all these places. So I don't know if that's helpful for other people to just plan in advance like that. I know some people are great at like, they see a sign and they're like, let me turn off and pull over and read this, historic sign. That's like a classic like dad move that is so annoying, I think. Stereotypically speaking. But I don't know. My dad is the kind of guy who like had his agenda and like, here we go. So I'm more used to that way of traveling.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, I'm always like, okay, I'm always trying to maximize, my weekend, or if it's a long weekend, and I'm usually packing too much into my schedule already. So I'm like, oh, that would be cool. But like, oh my God, I've been driving for so long, and like, I gotta, do this, that, and the other, once I get home. So, but Aspen and kayaking on turquoise water, that sounds so worth it.
Yeah. I gotta get out there. I gotta do this. And apparently, so it's on the Wood River, Jackson F. Kimball. And there are some like kayak trips up the Wood River that you can do. And there's like some class 1 rapids. So like some easier, white water that makes it a little exciting. I don't know. This is one that like I was just looking at the other day and I was getting really excited about the possibility. So this stuff's out there, it's not a big name brand state park, but you can find these really beautiful spots if you just try something different.
Yep. Very cool. Well, future fall episode, we got it planned out right now.
That's right. Well, folks, that will do it for us for today. Until next time, you can watch our videos on the Oregonians YouTube channel and view all of our travel and outdoors coverage on OregonLive.com/travel, as well as HereIsOregon.com.
Please leave us a rating or review if you enjoyed the show. And if you want to support this podcast as well as our local journalism, please consider a subscription to Oregon Live. You can find details at OregonLive.com/pod support. Also, if you're a fan of the show and you're interested in potentially sponsoring it, you can get in touch with our marketing people at advertise@oregonian.com. This episode of the show is produced by me, Vicki Connor, alongside Jamie Hale.
Stay safe and happy travels, everyone. Until next time, we leave you with this 10 seconds of Zen.